Okay, we're going to answer the question about cream soups and specifically how to make cream of broccoli soup. This certainly would be one of America's favorite soups, the cream of broccoli, and we're going to put a little twist or two on this, but I'm going to give you a formula and a process, some techniques and principles about making cream of broccoli soup that you can apply to just about all the cream soups that you make if you want to, okay? Obviously, there's multiple ways of making cream soup. I think the overall, we have to say that people would assume that a cream soup is a soup that's creamy and has been slightly thickened. That's how one would identify one, I suppose. But in the big picture, there's a few principles and techniques that are very specific that can guide and help you through the process of making any cream soup, and you're going to learn those on this video today. We also have two other cream soups, and you will notice that the techniques and process that I take the cream of broccoli soup through will more or less be duplicated with different little twists and turns on the cream of potato soup and the cream of tomato soup that are both part of this text, okay? So we're going to start you out with the cream of broccoli, and we're going to begin by putting a little bit of whole unsalted butter into a soup pan, okay? And we have a little 1.5 gallon pan here, and we're going to put a little bit of butter in there. And I want you to pay special attention to how I cut the broccoli up, because the part of the broccoli that you're going to use for the soup is just the center part of this root. The bottom part of this root, which is slightly woody, is always discarded. It has no function in cooking or eating to speak of. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut off the bottoms that we don't want off all the broccoli that we have, and we're going to get that out of here. Yeah. Okay. Now, real quick, we're going to get the onion and the celery started. I think my particular recipe calls for three ribs of celery and 1 large to medium-sized onion. I'm going to slice the onion. Put it in there with the butter. Cut up the celery. Remember, it doesn't matter how much or way that you slice, as long as it's small enough to cook in a short period of time, because basically this is going to be pureed with our portable blender stick, which of course you can use a food processor or a regular blender for that function also. Okay, let's get the celery in there. And now we're going to cut the florets off of all these broccoli, because we're going to use these and incorporate them into the soup in later stages, which is going to help keep the soup green and give it that broccoli look. But we're going to use the stems, the middle of the roots, I should say, as the primary pureed broccoli flavor. And then we're going to puree some of the florets into it later. So let's get this sliced up, these stems, as we're going along here, and get them in the pot here. Just cutting them in half first before I slice them to expedite the process of how long it takes for this soup to cook. The bigger the pieces, the longer it takes for them to be pureeable. Now my recipe called for 1.5 pounds of broccoli, so I have a little bit more than that here. So we're going to stop. I'm going to leave this broccoli alone, and we're going to use these here and that here, and that's all. Cutting some more stems up here. Okay. I'm going to throw a little bit more butter in there for the amount of food that I have. So it doesn't, again, matter what the measurement is for how much butter this stage of making a soup might require. Whatever the recipe says is almost irrelevant once you understand the principle of what you're doing. In other words, if you don't have enough butter, you got to add some more. And that the oil or the butter is the thing that's used to transmit the heat to the food from the flame itself. So you just need the amount that will, so that the food will have something to sit in. And that's how you need to approach how much butter should I put in my soup to cook it at this point, or anything like that. Now we're going to season this just a pinch with the, bring the dried leaf thyme over, Louis. I'm going to put a little bit of pepper and a little bit of salt. And we're going to put just a pinch of dried thyme in the soup here. I don't know if the pinch is the proper technical measurement, but you know what I mean. All right, now, all right, while that's cooking, remember now, this is a cream soup. So this soup, very much like a white sauce versus a brown sauce. When you make a white sauce or a white soup, if you will, which in the case of a cream soup, you don't brown the foods because it'll discolor the soup and it'll have a brown flavor instead of a, quote, white flavor, if you will. So you want to be careful not to brown the stuff. You're just cooking it until it's tender enough to eat. And keep in mind that the cooked vegetable and broccoli gives off a slightly different flavor into the soup when it's pureed than an uncooked one does. Just take a raw mushroom and eat it, and take a cooked mushroom and eat it, and you'll see what I mean. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these florets and we're going to blanch them. I need that ice water over here. We're going to blanch them in some boiling salted water so they get nice and green. Here, just set it right up here in the towels there. There you go. And I need water inside here too, a little bit. Okay. All we want to do is we want to put the broccoli and shock it into the boiling water. This is going to be used for part of the garnish. We're going to do that while the stuff is sauteing here, which, by the way, is coming along good. You don't need to cook it that much, okay? You want to, if you cook it halfway, you're okay. Now, yeah, just pour the water right there. Now, I'm going to put a pinch of garlic in this soup, and although I have it in the written PDF recipe, and I'm doing it on the video here, it's not something you have to do. This soup will turn out great without it. But I like to add a little bit too, but be careful because you don't want your soup to taste like garlic. In this particular case, this is not a pronounced additive to the soup, okay? All right. I put maybe a big tablespoon in that whole thing. Now, according to me, we're making approximately 2 quarts of soup here, okay? Now, I have recipe calls for 1 1/4 quarts, give or take, of chicken stock. So we're going to throw some stock in here. And recipe calls for a little bit of potato, which is one of the things that one can use to thicken a soup. You add pre-boiled and peeled potatoes sliced up to whatever the liquid is that you're going to be thickening and pureeing, all right? So I'm going to take 1 potato to start with, because remember, I can always add more thickening agent. I don't want to make it too thick. Then what? Then I have to add more stock and dilute the flavor of the soup to adjust the texture. So cautiously, as always, when thickening your stock and sauce, the first stages of that process, you're always very cognizant of the fact that be careful you don't over thicken it. So I'm going to add just the 1 potato to it. It's a little bit like cooking a steak. Once it's well done, you can't make it medium. So we have a tendency to cook our steaks a little bit more to the rare side so that we can always cook it some more if we need to. All right, there's the potato in there. Now, we're going to let that come to a simmer and cook. And now, the broccoli florets. I have boiling water right here. And let me push this to the back and bring the boiling water to the front here now. As in the preparation of vegetables video, you will see that this process that I'm doing right now with blanching the broccoli, in this particular case, has a couple of functions here. One of them is it makes the broccoli greener. when you drop it into boiling water and then shock it into ice water, which will stop the cooking process. This process, like I said, has like two functions for the soup. First, it makes the broccoli greener. And then when you puree the broccoli into the soup, near the end, it will make the soup greener, and it'll look like a nice green cream broccoli soup. So that's one function. The other function is, obviously, we're going to make the soup taste more like broccoli when we puree it in there. Okay, so we have boiling salted water. We have florets. We're dropping them in the water. And I've got some ice water here, which we will ultimately just drop the blanched broccoli in. Now, we're not cooking the broccoli till it's tender enough to eat, which is something you might do if you were making a vegetable for dinner. You might blanch it and then reheat it slightly in some butter and salt and pepper or something like that, or who knows how you make it, but you certainly can find out a lot about that in the preparation of vegetables video. But for right now, we're not going to cover that. So anyway, because the florets are soft to begin with, you don't really need to cook them to make them pureeable like you do the rest of those soup ingredients, which tend to be a little bit tougher. Broccoli florets are kind of soft to begin with. And when you puree them into the soup, you wouldn't even want them cooked a lot so that they would puree a lot, because you want that broccoli pieces left in there. So when it's not cooked that much, you can't puree it that well, and it consequently has that effect for you by not cooking it that much. So that's another function. Now, keep in mind that we're going to take some of these florets also and use them as garnish, whole or sliced, on top of the soup in the bowl for a final presentation on the soup, too. That would certainly be a third reason, correcting myself, that would certainly be a third reason to blanch this broccoli like this, to make it nice and green. And then you can help show your soup off when you're putting it together at the end. Okay, now that soup, that broccoli, let me get a towel to put this on here. Let me have a slotted spoon there, Louis, please. Or one of that, give me that Chinese thing there. Skimmer. Perfect. Now we'll take our broccoli and shock it into the ice water. This would be a classic blanching of the veg technique that one would apply to, I could probably think of 100 vegetables that you can blanch like this. And that's that. See how nice and green that is? Now I'm going to show you how nice and green it is right next to some broccoli that has not been blanched, so you'll see exactly what I mean too. That stuff is green. Now one can make this even greener, but carefully they could put a half a teaspoon of baking soda in this boiling water just before you throw the broccoli in. It will make the broccoli even greener. The only problem with that is it has a tendency, the baking soda, to break the fiber of the vegetable down slightly. So you got to be careful how much you put in. But that's a trick that a lot of chefs use to make things really green for presentations. Okay, the soup's coming along well. I'm just going to add a pinch more chicken stock to that to make sure everything is covered up inside there, okay? Now, look at these two pieces of broccoli side by side. This one's blanched, but it's still basically kind of raw and hard, okay? And so they're shocked enough. That shocking in the ice water is absolutely essential for particularly your green vegetables, which have a tendency to lose the color if you don't stop the cooking process. So I'm going to take this broccoli now out of the ice water and set it aside, because in a very short time here we're going to puree some of these florets into the final soup. And in our particular case today, I'm going to use one of the recommendations that is in the soup itself, and that is to puree blue cheese into the cream broccoli soup and also garnish it with it. That's a nice little touch, and you can also use goat cheese for that if you want it also, and that's nice. We're going to put walnuts, chopped parsley, broccoli florets, and then I put a little slice of something red. You can maybe put a little twist of red pepper on there, or a little minced tomato or something like that. And the red against the green will help you a lot. We'll get there in a minute. Okay, let's bring the soup back to the forefront here. And this is almost pureeable. And rather than take a break, I'm going to talk to you while this is boiling about this whole cream soup process. that one can apply to anything. So far, we sliced some onions and some celery, cooked it, then we threw our broccoli in. I'm going to refer to the broccoli as our primary product for the soup. Now, I can change that primary product to mushroom and just put mushrooms in there instead, or cauliflower and put cauliflower in there. In the case of cauliflower, I love cream of cauliflower with Parmesan cheese, but I'm not going to go into that. We have not enough time to talk about my likes. But so then you can put tomato in there, which we're going to do in the cream of tomato soup, and then or potato. But the process so far is the same. Onions and celery cooked in some butter with a little bit of seasoning, put the primary product in. Then put the stock in. Then adjust it. In the case of the broccoli, we're using potato. We're adding a little thickening agent to it. Some soups, like the potato, for example, wouldn't need an addition like that. And then you may put a pinch of cornstarch or roux in there in one of them instead. So the variations on the thickening part change slightly, and the cook has some kind of freewheeling license in that area. Okay, and then continuing on with my formula and technique on making cream soups, which, by the way, I would just about call infallible and guaranteed to work for you. After thousands of soup preparations myself, I finally settled on this one process for making cream soups that always works. But then you're bringing it to a boil, and then typically you're pureeing it in the case of the examples that I've given, which are potato, tomato, mushroom, broccoli, and cauliflower. Process would all be the same as if we were making cream of broccoli. Then we would adjust the texture, and then we would season or add our additives. In the case of the broccoli, we're going to put blue cheese, cream, butter, salt, and pepper. Then garnish it with some walnuts. Maybe in the case of the potato, we'd be garnishing it with bacon, and or adding even mushrooms to it. So that part changes, which is the slight license to change the additive flavors. But the process here now continues to be the same for all of them. We cooked the celery and the onions in the butter. We added the primary product. We put stock on it and made an adjustment for thickening if necessary. Simmered it until it was tender enough to puree. Then we're pureeing it, which we're about to do with this broccoli right here. Then we would put it back on the stove and adjust the flavoring and seasoning and finish it, which is a process we're going to do with the broccoli soup. Then all of these soups in effect are kind of the same. So when you know how to make one really well, you can apply all of this information to all the cream soups that you make. This is the significant aspect of today's lesson about the cream broccoli soup. Obviously, the cream broccoli soup itself is worth taking a lesson for them. All right, we're going to take a look at this now. And, Louis, can you pull this ice water out for me now? Thank you. We're just checking to see if this is tender enough to puree. This is tender enough to puree.
John, show that again so we can
okay.
camera on that.
I've just taken out what I would consider to be the thickest piece of the stem and see if it's tender enough to puree. It's pretty darn close. It's close enough. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And this is, let me have a medium-sized ladle too there, Louis. I'm going to put the broccoli soup into a taller cylinder when I use the puree stick, rather than a wide one like this pot is, thank you. Because the turbulence of the water will puree it faster, okay? That's a kind of a, it's obvious to me now, but there was a point when I first started cooking where I had to realize that it worked better that way. And so I'm just telling you that's something you should keep in mind when you have to puree something like this. So let's move the broccoli over here. And
Can you pull that out one more time?
okay. There's your broccoli soup. Let's do a little. See, it's still a little bit green. That's the other thing that's probably worth mentioning here in this lesson, and that is that now I'm saying to cook these until they're pureeable. And it does not mean that you should cook them until they're almost mush and they have no color left to them. Because as you eliminate the color of the broccoli by cooking it too much, you have to add more color to the soup at some point to make it green. So any green that you can keep going in the soup throughout the entire process is certainly worth keeping, okay? Okay, now we're going to probably do this in a couple of batches here, and I might need another pot, but I might not. I might be able to do this all in one batch here. Hold on, let's see if I can get this all in here. I can, but it might be a little bit dangerous. We'll see. How do they say? Danger is my business. You know, come on. It shouldn't be yours, though. All right. Shut these off. It's hot enough over here today. All right, let's start zapping this along here. The trick when you're using these pureeing sticks is never let it sit motionless like this because you just burn the machine out. The trick is to keep it low just above the bottom and in a circular motion. That will puree the soup the fastest. Okay. We're halfway there. Tastes nice. Now, because we're going to be pureeing some of these into this soup anyway, we don't need to puree this any more than it is right now because it's going to be getting, this will get a little bit more pureed as we're semi-pureeing these into it anyway. So it'll still get even smoother than it is. And I want you to see the texture of soup the way it is now. Now, right now, it's a little bit thick, but it's got a little bit of chunk of broccoli in it. I think we all want to feel like there is food in the cream of broccoli soup and that it's not pureed like baby food. That would not be desirable, I think, from the person who's eating it. So let's, what happened to my pot? My soup pot. So we're going to get this back in the soup pot and let's get some of these broccoli stems here while we're waiting for the pot and get them kind of ready to puree. I'm going to take a couple of really nice little florets like this here. Come on down, Richard. And thank you, sir. Let's just throw this back in the soup pot here real quick. Looks nice so far. Let's bring it up to a simmer. So we're going to use it for demoing the first one. We'll use, that's enough garnish. I'll give you a little bit more. There's enough garnish right there for one bowl of soup, see? Meanwhile, we're going to take some of these florets, get them lined up here. And we're going to reduce some of the cream, so when we add it to it, I have a pan right back here for reducing the cream, those nice wide pan for reducing it faster than these tall cylindrical type saucepans, which have a tendency to boil over on the cream. Not to suggest that this will not boil over if I don't watch it, but it will reduce twice as fast in a wide-mouthed cooked piece of cookware, if you will. All right. Now, the process of finishing this cream broccoli soup, or any of these cream soups, as you will see as you look through the soup DVD, if you happen to go from one to the other looking around, you'll find the same process. Again, I repeat, this is important to stress and for you to accept that this process can be the same. The bisque soups, for example, are very much like that. The process is the same for all four of the primary bisque soups, just that the primary ingredient, lobster, shrimp, whatever it is, changes. So the cream soups are a little bit like that. Now, cream soups, of course, have evolved, where the bisque soup has not really evolved that much. Cream soups of all of the categories of soup making are the one soup that has changed dramatically. They used to be made with thickened white sauce, bechamel sauce, if you will, with food added to it, with very little pureeing involved, or flavor adjusting, as you're going to see in the ones that we're making. They were very standardized like that, and they weren't that good. They've advanced, and they're better than they used to be. And that's the only reason they've changed, by the way. No one's ever been able to improve on the bisques. That's why they haven't changed that much. Okay, this broccoli soup is ready to be finished. it's not necessary for you to do skimming on the broccoli soup after it's pureed, because it doesn't have a lot of stuff that it's going to throw to the surface that's insoluble for you to remove. And it's not going to affect the final texture of the soup like some other sauces or soups might that have more stuff in them that has to be skimmed off. Okay, let's just take a peek down here, Richard, at the soup so we can see where we are right now. And I'm going to take a little bit of this soup and we're going to put it here so we can see the difference when we're done with the soup after we pureed the florets in it and add the cheese to it. Now, how's the cream coming? The cream's boiling right along. Now we have some crumbled blue cheese. See how I blew on that and that cooled it off enough to keep it from overflowing? I went and turned down and went and blew on it. So remember that. That's a good trick. Okay, I'm going to adjust that flame a little bit. All right, now we're going to come back over here and we're going to put some blue cheese. That looks like a lot, but it's not that much. Matter of fact, I don't even think enough. We're going to put just a little bit more in there before we puree it. By the time you add the butter, the broccoli, the cream, and the cheese, this mix of flavor dilutes the intensity of the cheese to some extent. And remember, you need to be able to identify the taste of the cheese while you're having the soup without it tasting like blue cheese soup, of course. So we'll stop right there. Now we're going to take some florets. You want to take the soft part of the florets. Yeah, most of the stems have been cut off of these. These look pretty good. Just throw them in there. Obviously, I started out with a lot more than 1.5 pounds of broccoli. Knowing how to make the soup is a lot more important than whether or not this recipe is exactly how you should make it. God knows every time I make a soup, and I've never used a recipe for making soup for, I can't think, in at least 15, 20 years. That needs more broccoli florets. And this would probably be enough now, right here, for garnishing all the amount of soup bowls that are going to come out of here. Recipe's pretty close, but it's worth mentioning that one must make the adjustment to the finishing of the soup, which is what we're doing now. This process, this stage of making this soup, or any of the cream soups, or any soups for that matter, this stage of finishing is where 50% of the eating experience is going to take place. You can make the perfect soup, but you don't have the right finishing amount of salt, cream, butter, whatever it happens to be, garnishes, and flavor additives, if you will, which is sometimes part of this process. If you don't concentrate on the finishing part, you're just not going to have a good soup. It's as simple as that. This is a very underemphasized stage in cooking, both anywhere you see on TV or in cookbooks and so on and so forth. And I'm here to tell you that it represents the largest part of the eating process, okay? So there we got the broccoli stems in there. Now let's give this some zapping in here. And I think we're going to have to put this back in here for the right effect here in terms of the pureeing. Did I get it all in there? Almost. Close enough. While we're doing this, let's add some of the butter. And the formula for adding the butter to the soups are all 2 ounces per quart. We're making a couple of quarts of soup here, maybe 2.5 quarts, so we'll put a little bit, 3 ounces of butter, give or take an ounce. Directly whole, unsalted butter, which is what I recommend you buy for everything. We'll puree the butter at the same time we're pureeing the broccoli florets. couple of big pieces. This soup is looking much better already. I have a couple of big pieces in here, minus the soup, that I can fit in here so we can get them pureed. This container is obviously just big enough to do this. Looks good. Now I'm going to give you a little comparison on the plate with what happens when you, quote, green the soup with the broccoli florets. You will notice, come down and see me, Richard, that one is really kind of fresh, colorful broccoli green, and one's kind of a different shade of green, okay? And this makes a big difference in the soup. Now, we're going to take this pureed soup, we're going to put it back in the pot. Now we're going to add the reduced cream, which is done here. See there? Now remember, you only need to add the amount of cream to the soup that will make the soup appear to be creamy. There's no exact formula for the amount of cream that's, quote, required, because there is no requirement for the amount of cream. It's a matter of taste, visual experience, and whether or not you think it has the right amount of flavor in it, whether or not it needs more cream. So don't get stuck on how much cream should I measure to put into the soup. Start taking some chances and pour a little bit and taste it and look at it, and you think you got it right, you're done. Okay, this soup is looking a little good. I'm going to throw the rest of the cream in. I think I got some room for that. Did you bring the walnuts over? Now, let's take a little taste test here first. Oh, this soup is nice. I love that blue cheese flavor in here. Let's get rid of that. Let's have another taste, just for the record. Wow, this is really good. And I'm not just saying that because I'm impressed with myself. I'm impressed with this food right here, I'll tell you. So the real question is, now, taking another look at the texture of the soup, as you can see, this could be considered perfect by some people.
Do that one more time, Chef. I missed
Okay. This texture could be considered perfect by some people for a cream and broccoli soup. Okay? And I might call this soup a pinch too thick. So I'm going to, and I can take some regular straight cream, of course, and add it to it if I wanted to thin it out. I'm going to put just a little bit of stock in here. After making the hundreds and hundreds of soups that I've made, I'm always looking for that perfect texture. Sometimes I'll add 5 tablespoons of stock to it because I think the texture will be just right for it then, you know. This looks good to me now. All right, we're going to try. Louis, can you give me a white soup plate? We're going to try the soup in 2 different locations. We're going to try it in a white bowl, and we're going to try it in a color bowl. In this white bowl here, or the color bowl here, we're going to start with that one, okay? So let's make sure your soup is hot, of course. Let me taste this one more time. I have added no salt and pepper to the soup. Well, the Gorgonzola cheese has a little bit of salt in it too. This soup is really good right now. Thank you, sir. I'm going to add a pinch of salt here. And I'm going to add a little bit of our fresh, finely ground pepper. Let's just give that a taste. This is nice. You're going to like this soup. All right. Let's start. Let's put a couple of bowls together. Let's put a little presentation together on the soup. Now, remember, having a warm or hot bowl is a very important part of sometimes doing this. If you want to, keep the soup, a little bit hot during the time that the person's eating it. Now we're going to take some broccoli florets. Let me have a tomato too, Louis. And let's sprinkle some around in that one. And we'll add our broccoli florets in one spot. On the other one, you can you'll be able to see the difference then. And let's put a little bit of blue cheese for garnish on top of these two soups, like that. And that one we'll put right in the middle of the blue cheese. And we have a few walnuts here too. Broccoli and walnuts would certainly be a classic combination dating back 100 years. Little walnuts. Now sometimes, my recipe I think calls for candied walnuts too, and that's a real nice addition to it. Regular walnuts are fine. You can put toasted almonds on here, or pecans, or candied pecans, and so on. Notice how the soup is coming together. Now we're going to put a little pinch of parsley on here. Not much. Be careful with the parsley. And just for fun, as I said earlier in this demonstration about putting something a little bit red on the soup, okay? These soups are looking great right now. They don't need the red, and a little bit of red would be kind of fun. We're just going to cut a little bit of tomato brunoise with the skin on. Tomato brunoise, which you do have a video for, okay, is finely minced tomato. You have some nice diced tomato there. Make sure you cut that all the way through. It has a tendency to come off in one big diced square if you don't. All right. A little bit. Oh, there. That kind of sets it off a little bit. See? There you go. There's your cream of broccoli soup. Soups in this case, two different presentations. One in a printed bowl and one in a white. White has a tendency to be the most used and really the best non-accent to accent the food on. I want to recap real quick before I end this particular lesson that this process that we went through for the cream broccoli soup, again, is consistent with multiple cream soup techniques and formulas, with the primary ingredient being changed. I hope you enjoyed this particular soup. I hope you make this and you like it.